The story begins on a quiet afternoon when James is outside playing football with his daughter, Lucy. They're in the yard, kicking the ball back and forth, just the two of them. It's one of those ordinary family moments, the kind that feels simple but warm. Then, mid-game, Lucy suddenly stops. Her attention drifts away from the ball and locks onto something in the distance. James notices and asks her what's wrong. She doesn't say anything at first, just stares ahead like she's seeing something that isn't there. When he asks again, a little more gently this time, Lucy finally speaks up. She says she sees her grandpa, James's father, Jackson. James looks over, scanning the same spot, but he doesn't see anything. The yard is empty. He turns back to Lucy and reminds her that Grandpa Jackson died last summer. He tries to reassure her, telling her grandpa is in heaven now. But Lucy just keeps looking ahead quietly, as if she knows what she saw and doesn't need convincing. She suddenly starts coughing. Not too hard, but enough to worry James. He picks her up and carries her back into the house. Inside, Isabel, Lucy's mom, is waiting. As soon as she sees Lucy, she comes over and touches her forehead, noticing right away that Lucy's still running a fever. Concern flickers across her face. James tells Isabel he'll take Lucy to see the doctor first thing tomorrow. He promises. Lucy, trying to brush off all the fuss, says she's just tired. Isabel isn't entirely convinced, but doesn't push too hard. Instead, she tells Lucy to try and eat something. They sit down, and Isabel gently reminds her of the date. It's December 1st, just the start of the month, and Lucy had been looking forward to Christmas. That little detail seems to pull Lucy back into the moment, and she says she still has time to finish reading her book. Isabel asks what book she's reading, and Lucy tells her it's about her and Jesus. That makes Isabel pause a little, but she lets it go. Then Lucy starts talking about someone else. She says there's a man she keeps seeing in her dreams. A sad man. Isabel asks her what kind of man he is, if she knows who he is or what he looks like. Lucy says she doesn't know his name. She just knows he's sad. That's all she can say. Later that evening, James is alone in his room. He opens a drawer and takes out a photo of his father, Jackson. He holds it quietly for a few moments, his face drawn and reflective. There's a lot he's not saying out loud, but it's there in the way he looks at the picture. Then he puts it back in its place. Before heading to bed, James walks over to Lucy's room. When he opens the door, he sees her sitting at her little desk, sketching something in a notebook. She's drawing a picture of Jesus. James smiles and walks in. He tells her that Jesus is sometimes called the Prince of Peace because he brings peace into people's hearts. He asks her what else she's been drawing, and Lucy shows him another drawing. It's the sad man, the one from her dreams. She's drawn him too, and she says something that gives James pause. She tells him that soon, she'll be a friend of Jesus. Her voice is calm, like she's sure of it. James kisses her goodnight, tucks her in gently, and leaves the room. But as he walks away, something strange happens, something he doesn't notice. Behind a bedroom door, standing just out of his sight, Lucy's grandfather appears again. Jackson. He's there, even though he died months ago. James, of course, doesn't see him, but Lucy does. The door closes behind James, and now it's just Lucy and her grandfather in the quiet room. He steps forward and greets her, telling her gently to stay in her room for a little while. Lucy looks pale and tired. She's clearly still not feeling well. Jackson kneels down beside her bed and tells her to go to sleep. He promises to stay with her the whole night. Meanwhile, James sits down with his wife for a quiet conversation. It's late in the evening, and the house has finally settled down. They're in the living room, talking softly, the way parents do when the kids are asleep, and there's finally a moment to breathe. The topic, of course, is Lucy. James shares what's been on his mind. He's worried, not just about Lucy's health, but also about what she's been saying lately. She keeps talking about this man she sees in her dreams. A sad man. And not just once, it's been consistent. His wife nods. She's noticed the same thing. Lucy seems to believe in this dream figure more than most kids would. It's not just imagination anymore. It's starting to feel deeper, like a conviction. James admits he doesn't know what to make of it. He's never seen the man she describes. He doesn't recognize the face, the presence, or anything about it. It's like Lucy's seeing something from another world, one he has no access to. And that, more than anything, leaves him unsettled. The next morning, the scene shifts to a hospital. In a quiet hallway, a doctor is speaking with a pastor. They're standing near a room where a patient named Edgar is being treated. Edgar's been there for a while, long enough that hope has started to fade from his life. He's a prisoner, cuffed to the hospital bed, and his condition is serious. His kidneys are failing. The doctor explains to the pastor that Edgar's going to need a transplant soon. Otherwise, he won't make it. Plans are already underway to transfer Edgar to another hospital for dialysis, and he's set to be placed on the transplant list. But despite all that, Edgar doesn't seem interested. He's withdrawn, disconnected. Edgar has been listening quietly from his bed. When the doctor and pastor think he's not paying attention, he speaks up, flatly. He says he doesn't care if he dies. He means it. After everything, he doesn't see the point in going on. The pastor tries to offer some hope. He tells Edgar that if the transplant works, he could have a few more years left, that there's still time ahead. And besides, his prison sentence isn't even finished. He still has a life to serve. But Edgar isn't moved. Being cuffed to a bed, separated from the world, and left behind by his own family. It's made him feel like there's nothing worth holding on to. To him, dying might be the only freedom left. Still, the pastor doesn't give up on him. He reaches into his bag and pulls out a worn Bible. He hands it to Edgar gently, suggesting he start reading it. He tells him it's never too late to find a second chance, that even in the most hopeless places, there's still a way forward. Edgar looks at the Bible, but doesn't take it right away. He admits he knows why his family left him. He says he did terrible things to his wife and daughter, and in a way, he believes he deserves everything that's happened. The loneliness, the sickness, the silence. But the pastor tells him that's exactly why he needs to read the Bible. Because the message inside isn't just about punishment. It's about mercy, forgiveness. He tells Edgar that God offers second chances even to people who think they don't deserve them. That even the worst of us are not beyond redemption. He says Edgar doesn't have to prove anything to the world. He just needs to open his heart to Jesus. That's the only one who truly matters in the end. Even though the pastor kept trying to encourage him, Edgar's mind was elsewhere. His thoughts weren't on God or second chances. He was more focused on something else entirely. What he really wanted was to somehow win back the approval of the people he'd lost. His family, his friends, the people who used to be part of his world before everything fell apart. In his head, maybe if he could fix his image, he'd be reaccepted. Maybe there was a chance to return to the life he once had. But even with the Bible in his hands, Edgar didn't want any of it. He looked at the pastor and said flat out that he wasn't interested in reading it. No hesitation, no polite rejection, just straight refusal. The pastor didn't take it personally. He stayed calm, just as kind as he'd been before. Without pushing the subject any further, he quietly began arranging the paperwork to have Edgar transferred to another hospital, a place where he could start getting proper dialysis, maybe even make it onto the transplant list if he chose to go along with it. But Edgar wasn't done being difficult. He turned his attention to the guard stationed next to his bed. Something about the guard's presence rubbed him the wrong way. Maybe it was the way the guy kept glancing over at him. Edgar snapped. He looked the officer in the eye and asked, in a sharp tone, what he was always staring at. The guard didn't hold back. Knowing Edgar's kidneys were failing, he replied coldly, "I'm staring at a dead man." Just like that. No sympathy, no filter, just the blunt truth, or at least how the guard saw it. Elsewhere, at another hospital across town, Lucy's mother had taken her in for a proper checkup. After examining her, Dr. Miller gave the diagnosis, pneumonia. Isabel, Lucy's mom, was clearly worried. Pneumonia wasn't something you took lightly. But Dr. Miller tried to ease her concerns. He said that if they caught it early and treated it properly, it wouldn't get worse. Without wasting time, the medical team started Lucy on antibiotics. The doctor also told Isabel that Lucy needed to drink more fluids and stay hydrated. Water would help her fight off the infection. The news caught Isabel a bit off guard. She hadn't expected Lucy's condition to be that serious. Just a day ago, Lucy had been outside, running around with her dad, full of energy. And now, here she was hooked up to medication, resting under hospital lights. It all felt sudden. Meanwhile, James made a phone call to his own mother. He wanted to talk about something that had been on his mind lately: Lucy's strange experiences. He told her about how Lucy had been seeing Jackson, her grandfather, who'd passed away. It wasn't just once or twice. Lucy had been mentioning it more often, like it was something real to her. James's mother listened patiently. Then she said something that made James pause. She told him how much she loved Lucy, and that if Lucy really was seeing Jackson, maybe it meant he was closer to them than they realized. Maybe he hadn't truly left. Maybe there was something about Lucy, something spiritual, that allowed her to feel his presence more clearly. James wasn't convinced. He thought maybe Lucy was just being intuitive. Kids sometimes pick up on things adults miss. That didn't necessarily mean she was actually seeing her grandfather's spirit. He didn't say it outright, but it was clear he doubted the whole idea. His mother didn't argue. She just said she didn't think it was strange at all. In fact, it made sense to her. She believed Lucy might really be seeing something others couldn't. But for James, the doubt was still there. He couldn't bring himself to accept it as truth. He didn't dismiss it completely, but he stayed cautious. What struck him as odd, though, was how Lucy behaved whenever she said she saw her grandfather. She'd suddenly get better. She could eat, move around, and even play like nothing was wrong. It was like his presence gave her strength. Eventually, Edgar is transferred to a new medical facility, one that's better equipped to handle the kind of care he needs. His health is failing fast, and the only thing that could really save him now is a kidney transplant. The pastor, who's been quietly walking alongside him through this journey, hands Edgar the same Bible before they part ways. He doesn't pressure him. He just says he hopes Edgar might someday open it. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. But the move doesn't solve everything. In fact, it brings up a new set of problems. At the new facility, the staff quickly note Edgar's status, not just as a critically ill patient, but as a convicted criminal. That changes things. Being both a prisoner and someone with such a serious medical condition puts him at a significant disadvantage. His name doesn't shoot to the top of the transplant list. If anything, it sinks lower. The doctor in charge of the facility makes it clear. He speaks directly to the pastor and the assigned guard, explaining that the chances of Edgar finding a matching donor are incredibly low. That's just how the system works. Organ donation comes with priorities, and Edgar's case isn't exactly high-ranking. Still, they'll follow procedure. They'll do what the law and medical ethics require. Keep him alive, at least for now. Days pass, and with no donor in sight, Edgar survives only because of the dialysis treatments. It becomes his routine. Outside of those sessions, he's kept locked in his hospital room. A guard is always there, assigned to watch over him. That guard has a specific instruction: never uncuff Edgar unless it's time for dialysis. No exceptions. This new guard isn't much for conversation. He's not a believer, and he doesn't pretend to care about giving Edgar any hope. In fact, one day, without even flinching, he tells Edgar something that hits hard. He says, "You're leaving this hospital in a body bag." Just like that. No filter. The words hang in the air, heavy and final. Edgar doesn't even respond at first, but it gets to him. The weight of everything, his illness, the rejection, the feeling that he's already been written off, it all crashes down at once. Out of frustration, Edgar takes the Bible the pastor left for him and shoves it off his bedside table. It hits the floor with a dull thud. He doesn't even look at it afterward. He's done. Meanwhile, back at home, James is checking in on Lucy. He walks in her bedroom to give her the medication prescribed by the doctor. But Lucy doesn't want it. She turns her face away, looking small and tired under her blanket. She says she doesn't feel like taking it. Then, something strange happens again, something James can't see. Lucy's grandfather appears in the room. Jackson. He stands quietly nearby, just like before. Lucy sees him immediately. He doesn't say much, but he encourages her to take the medicine, even though she doesn't want to. It's a quiet, almost invisible moment, but one that clearly matters to Lucy. James, unaware of Jackson's presence, sits down by the bed and asks Lucy what she's looking at. She answers honestly. She says she sees her grandpa again. James tenses up. It's not the first time she said something like this, but hearing it again makes him uncomfortable. He tells her to stop making up stories, that it's not real, that people don't just come back like that. His voice isn't angry, just unsettled. It's like he's trying to convince himself as much as he's trying to convince her. A moment later, Isabel walks into the room. James steps away, saying nothing more, and leaves Lucy in her mother's care. Isabel brings a bowl of soup into Lucy's room and tries to get her to eat something. She sits by the bedside, carefully scooping out a spoonful, holding it up gently like a mother always does when her child is sick. But Lucy doesn't seem interested. She turns her head slightly, quietly refusing. It's the same issue that's been going on for days. She's lost her appetite because of the illness. Nothing tastes right. Nothing feels right. But then, without saying a word, Lucy sees something again. At the corner of the room, her grandfather appears. Jackson, smiling softly, he gives her a thumbs up, just a simple gesture, like he's cheering her on. It's enough to make Lucy reconsider. Slowly, she leans forward and accepts the spoonful of soup. It's a small moment, but it means a lot. After she swallows the first bite, Lucy smiles faintly and blows a kiss into the air, looking straight at her grandfather. Of course, Isabel sees it, but she doesn't see who the kiss is meant for. She pauses and gently asks Lucy, "Who are you blowing a kiss to?" Lucy answers the way she always does. She says it's for Grandpa, the one who's been visiting her, the one only she can see. Isabel doesn't say much in response. She just watches, maybe trying to figure out what to believe. Grandpa keeps showing up to Lucy quietly and calmly. Sometimes when she's drawing, sometimes when she's just lying in bed, and sometimes even when she hums to herself. He doesn't speak much, but he's always there, like a steady presence that comforts her. James, on the other hand, finds strength through his faith. Every night, without fail, he prays. He prays for Lucy's healing. He believes in God's power, believes in prayer, and he puts his trust in something bigger. Isabel shares that faith too. Both of them do. Even though they don't fully understand what's happening with Lucy, they continue to believe she's going to recover. But then, just days before Christmas, Lucy suddenly takes a turn for the worse. Her condition drops fast, without warning, and they rush her to the emergency room. The moment they arrive, the doctors move quickly. The medical staff orders a chest x-ray right away and begins running blood tests to figure out how far the pneumonia has progressed. It doesn't take long before they decide to admit Lucy immediately. She's coughing more than before, and now she's being closely monitored with machines and IVs. Even in the hospital, even in the middle of all the worry, James and Isabel hold on to their faith. They sit quietly at her bedside, praying that Lucy's healing is coming, that this is just a passing moment, that things will turn around. Later, as James spends a few minutes alone with Lucy, she starts talking again about her dream. She says the sad man has come back. He appeared again in her sleep. James asks her to describe him, what he looks like, how she knows he's sad, but Lucy struggles to explain. She can't quite put into words. She only knows what she feels when she sees him. Right then, her grandfather shows up again, standing in a hospital room, visible only to Lucy. She sees him clearly and points him out, calling attention to where he's standing. James, following her hand, looks, but there's nothing there. Just white walls, machines, and quiet. He tries to keep calm, but once again he tells Lucy gently that Grandpa isn't there. He tells her he's gone, that he doesn't exist anymore. But deep down, James is shaken. The more Lucy says these things, the more he starts to question it all. She's been so consistent. Whether they're at home or now here in the hospital, Lucy keeps seeing the same thing. And James, even though he doesn't want to admit it, starts wondering if maybe there's something going on he just can't understand. A little later, the doctor comes back with test results in hand. He finds Isabel and gives her the update. There's some good news. Lucy's condition has improved slightly. The 4 fluids help bring her fever down, and she's showing small signs of progress. But there's also a concern. When the doctor compares Lucy's current x-ray results with the previous ones taken by Dr. Miller, it's clear that the pneumonia has worsened. It's progressed much more than they expected. After reviewing Lucy's latest test results, The doctor decided it was best for her to stay in the hospital a little longer. She couldn't be sent home just yet, not until they saw a stronger response to the antibiotics. Her condition needed to be watched closely. One particular concern stood out. Her red blood cell count was unusually high. It suggested that the infection in her lungs was still progressing, despite the initial treatment. This caught Isabel off guard. She hadn't expected things to be this serious. She knew Lucy was unwell, but hearing that her body was still fighting a worsening infection made everything feel heavier. Later that day, Lucy's grandmother arrived at the hospital. Just as she was settling in, the nurses prepared to transfer Lucy to the main admission department. They placed her gently into a wheelchair for the move. But something happened as they rolled her down the hallway. Lucy suddenly stopped. Her eyes locked onto someone else in the corridor. It was a man in another wheelchair, thin, pale, and wearing yellow prison clothing. He was handcuffed, slumped over, clearly not in good shape. Lucy immediately asked the nurse to stop. She couldn't look away. That was him. That was the man from her dreams. It was Edgar. Without hesitating, Lucy pulled out her notebook from the bag on her lap. She flipped through the pages and found one of her drawings, the one she'd been working on for weeks. She showed it to her grandma first, then to James and Isabel. She pointed to it and said, "That's him. That's the sad man I've been seeing in my dreams. He needs help." Everyone looked at the drawing. It was rough, drawn by a child, but there was something about it, something unmistakable. The face, the expression, the overall look, it all matched the man in the wheelchair. It matched Edgar. The moment passed quickly, and the nurses continued wheeling Lucy toward the admission room. She was admitted without any more delays and placed into a hospital bed as they waited for Dr. Stanwyck to review her condition. James, however, couldn't shake the image of that man, Edgar. There was something unsettling about it. He quietly walked over to one of the nurses at the desk and asked about the man in handcuffs. Who was he? What was he doing there? The nurse explained everything clearly. The man Lucy had seen, Edgar, was a prisoner who'd been transferred to their hospital because of advanced kidney failure. His condition was serious, and he could barely walk on his own. That's why he was always in the wheelchair. And because he was a convict, a guard was always nearby. James listened carefully. He looked concerned. The nurse reassured him that everything was under control. Edgar wasn't a threat. He was just a very sick man who needed help. The nurse added that Edgar wasn't being treated in a prison hospital because those facilities lacked the staff and equipment to manage his condition. He had been placed on the transplant list, but so far, no donor had been found. That's when James started to see things a little differently. For the first time, he began to feel something close to sympathy. He didn't know Edgar's full story, but seeing him in that state, weak, ignored, and clearly fading, sparked something in him. Maybe it was because of Lucy. Maybe it was because of the drawing. But something shifted. As James stood there, still digesting everything, Jackson, Lucy's grandfather, appeared again in the corridor. He was watching, standing silently in the background. James couldn't see him, of course, but Jackson could see James. And he could see the frustration and confusion on James' face, even if James didn't know he was being watched. Not long after, Dr. Stanwyck arrived at the hospital to check on Lucy. She reviewed the charts, observed her cough, and saw that the symptoms hadn't gone away. After a short check-in with Lucy, she asked to speak privately with James and Isabel. They stepped into a side room where the doctor gave them an update. She explained that Lucy's infection hadn't cleared yet. The bacteria was stubborn, and her body was still fighting it. Because of that, they needed to act fast to avoid complications. Lucy would need to be put on 4 antibiotics to try to flush the infection out completely. Dr. Stanwyck didn't sugarcoat the situation. She told them that if the infection wasn't stopped in time, it could spread into Lucy's bloodstream, a condition called septic shock. And if that happened, it could be fatal. James and Isabel sat in silence for a moment. It wasn't what they expected to hear. They'd been holding on to hope, believing that Lucy would walk out of the hospital soon. But now, they were faced with the reality of how serious her condition had become. Still, even after everything, they chose to keep believing. They weren't giving up, not yet. They held on to the hope that Lucy would recover, that she would get through this, that this wasn't the end of the story. As night slowly settled over the hospital, everything got quieter. The hallways were dim and still, and most of the rooms had their lights turned low. In one of those rooms, Edgar lay on his hospital bed, under the same thin blanket, surrounded by the familiar sounds of machines humming and beeping at steady intervals. A new guard was assigned to watch over him that night. Edgar didn't know his name, and they hadn't spoken much. Still, just like the others, the guard stood by the door with an unreadable expression, keeping an eye on him like clockwork. Edgar had been keeping something close to him every day, something small but important, a photograph of his family. He kept it right by his bedside, tucked under the edge of the mattress or resting quietly near his pillow. It was old and a little worn around the edges, but it gave him something to hold on to. A reminder of who he used to be before everything fell apart. When he heard the footsteps of the guard entering his room, Edgar quickly grabbed the photo and slid it into his pocket, hoping the man wouldn't notice. But the guard saw him move. He walked over, reached out without asking, and demanded to see what Edgar was hiding. Reluctantly, Edgar pulled the photo out and handed it over. Without a second thought, the guard looked at the picture, barely glanced at the faces on it, then tore it in half. 2 clean pieces. He dropped them on the side table like they meant nothing. Edgar didn't say a word. He didn't fight, but something inside him shifted. That picture was all he had left, a small connection to a life that was gone. Now, even that was broken. He lay there in silence for the rest of the night, staring up at the ceiling. The sadness grew heavier, and for the first time in a long time, the bitterness that he'd tried to hold back came flooding in. He started to believe that maybe this world was exactly as cruel as it seemed, that people who do wrong deserve to be treated the same way. That kindness doesn't last. Elsewhere in the hospital, James and Lucy were settling down for the night. They sat together on Lucy's bed and prayed like they always did. James held her hand, and they spoke softly, asking for healing, asking for peace. Later, in the middle of the night, something unusual happened again. Jackson, Lucy's grandpa, appeared quietly in her room. As always, she was the only one who could see him. There was no sound, no light, just his presence. Without hesitation, Lucy got out of bed and followed him. She stepped carefully into the hallway, her bare feet brushing softly against the cold floor. As she walked, she came across someone in the corridor, Barl, the janitor. He was cleaning the floor with slow, tired movements. His shoulders were slumped, his face downcast. He looked deeply sad, like he'd been carrying something heavy for a long time. Lucy stopped and asked him why he looked so unhappy. Barl didn't expect anyone to talk to him, let alone a small girl in pajamas. But after a moment, he opened up. He told her he'd lost his wife and that the pain hadn't gone away. Grief still lived in his chest every day. Lucy listened. Then she simply said, "Jesus loves you." That was it. Nothing more. But those words seemed to settle something inside Barl. He smiled faintly and told Lucy he'd remember what she said. And then he went back to cleaning, his posture just a little lighter than before. Lucy kept walking down the corridor, following her grandfather. As they moved quietly through the hospital, she realized something that had been true all along. She always felt stronger when her grandpa was near. There was something about his presence that made her feel safe, grounded, like nothing could truly hurt her. He told her something else too, that angels have special powers, powers that help the ones who believe. Lucy listened, and even though she didn't say much in return, she understood. She believed. What she didn't tell her grandfather right away was that she had a plan. She wanted to visit Edgar. She didn't know him personally. They hadn't met before, but she had seen him in her dreams, in the hallway, and something inside her told her they were supposed to meet, that they were going to become friends. Grandpa seemed to agree. He told her there was a reason she kept seeing Edgar. Maybe she had a small but important job to do, something only she could do. So the two of them, Lucy and her grandpa, started coming up with a plan, a way to get her into Edgar's room, quietly, carefully, without anyone noticing, because now they both believed Lucy had a special assignment waiting. As things continued to unfold in the hospital, It became clearer that none of this was a coincidence. Lucy being admitted to the very same place where Edgar was staying, this wasn't by chance. It was part of something bigger, something planned, according to her grandfather, and maybe even according to something deeper in Lucy's heart. This was all part of God's design. Jesus had given Lucy a special assignment, and she was just starting to understand what that meant. By now, Lucy and her grandpa had reached the hallway outside Edgar's room. They stood just around the corner, hidden from view. Right in front of the door sat a guard, still wide awake, staring at his screen and keeping watch like always. Getting in wasn't going to be easy. They couldn't just walk in. So Grandpa came up with a plan. He told Lucy to wait and count with him. 1, 2, 3. At 3, Grandpa somehow triggered the fire alarm. It rang out loudly through the hall, sudden and sharp. Lights blinked red, and the buzzing sound echoed off the hospital walls. The guard at Edgar's door immediately stood up, startled, and stepped away to figure out where the alarm was coming from. Just like that, the doorway was unguarded. Lucy didn't hesitate. She slipped through the opening and quietly made her way into Edgar's room. Inside, Edgar was lying in bed, exactly where he'd always been. Same tired face, same heavy expression. He barely reacted when he noticed her come in. He just turned his head slightly, not really interested in whatever this little girl had to say. Lucy walked up to his bedside and gently introduced herself. Her voice was soft, calm, no fear, no hesitation. She told him something simple but strange, that he was the sad man Jesus had been showing her in her dreams. At first, Edgar didn't say much. He just stared, unsure of how to respond. Lucy went on anyway. She told him that she wanted to be his friend, that even though they didn't know each other, she felt like she was supposed to be there. But Edgar cut in quietly, telling her he didn't believe in Jesus Christ. Not then, not now. Still, Lucy didn't seem discouraged. She told him, even if you don't believe in Jesus, Jesus still believes in you. That made Edgar pause just for a second. But still, he didn't reply. He just lay there, eyes distant. Before leaving, Lucy looked around and noticed the Bible, the one the pastor had left for Edgar, still lying on the floor. She bent down, picked it up carefully, and placed it gently on Edgar's chest. She didn't push him to read it. She just gave him a simple suggestion. Start with the story of the 3 wise men. With that, she smiled and said goodbye. She told Edgar she'd come back the next day to check on him. Then she quietly slipped out of the room before the guard could return. Out in the hallway, the guard was already back in his seat, scrolling on his phone and preparing to zone out for the night. He pulled out his earphones, ready to drown out the hospital noise. But just before putting them in, he paused. He heard something. Voices. A conversation. Someone was talking inside Edgar's room. The guard immediately stood up and opened the door. He looked around but saw no one else inside, just Edgar lying in bed. He asked him flat out who he'd been talking to. Edgar looked at him calmly and said he hadn't spoken to anyone. The guard frowned, confused. He could have sworn he heard a conversation. Clear words, not just mumbling. But the room was empty. He stared at Edgar for a moment longer, then slowly backed out. At that point, the guard started to think Edgar was really starting to lose it. Maybe the illness was messing with his head. Maybe it was the stress. Either way, he figured Edgar had finally crossed into talking to himself. Meanwhile, Lucy had been hiding behind one of the cabinets in Edgar's room. As the guard faces Edgar, she quickly sneaks away outside Edgar's room and returns to her room, where she briefly talks to her grandpa before sleeping. Grandpa assures her that everything will soon be all right and allows her to get some sleep. The next morning started out calm. Lucy seemed fine at first, but then, out of nowhere, she began to struggle. Her breathing became shallow and rapid. She clutched at her chest, trying to speak but barely able to get the words out. Isabel noticed right away. She rushed to the nurse's station, calling for help. Within moments, Dr. Stanwyck arrived. She checked Lucy quickly and realized the inflammation in Lucy's lungs had worsened. The bacteria had caused swelling that made it hard for Lucy to breathe properly. Oxygen was started immediately. Dr. Stanwyck reviewed her labs again. Her red blood cell count was still elevated, which wasn't a good sign. Even worse, Lucy wasn't responding to the antibiotics she had been taking. The current treatment wasn't enough anymore. The situation was urgent. The doctor wasted no time. She called in a specialist who focused on bacterial infections. Together, they came up with a new treatment plan. Lucy would be started on a stronger combination of 2 different antibiotics, and they ordered another chest X-ray to see how far the infection had spread. After the new medication began, Lucy's breathing slowly improved. It wasn't a full recovery, but it was enough that she could be moved. Nurses came in to transfer her to the imaging department for the new X-ray. As Lucy was being wheeled down the hallway in her chair, something unexpected happened. Coming from the opposite direction, another wheelchair approached. It was Edgar, on his way to dialysis. They saw each other immediately. Lucy looked up, recognized him, and smiled. She didn't hesitate to ask him what was wrong. Edgar, who had grown used to the girl's strange presence, replied honestly. He told her that his kidneys were failing, and unless someone donated a kidney to him, he didn't have much time left. James was pushing Lucy's wheelchair and heard everything. Lucy turned to him and asked something that caught him completely off guard. "Daddy," she said, "do I have kidneys?" James answered gently, "Yes, honey, you have 2 kidneys." Then she asked the real question, "Can I give one of mine to Edgar?" James didn't know how to respond at first. He shook his head and said, "It doesn't work that way." He didn't explain why. He just pushed her chair forward, steering them past Edgar without looking back. Lucy stayed quiet for a second, but then she asked something else. "If Jesus loves Edgar, why shouldn't I talk to him again?" James didn't answer right away. He didn't give a clear reason. He just mumbled something and kept walking. He seemed uncomfortable, maybe even unsure of his own thoughts. Lucy didn't push any further. She simply looked ahead and stopped asking questions. Out of respect, or maybe just out of quiet understanding, she decided to obey her father, even if she didn't quite understand why. That night, after the hospital lights had dimmed and the halls quieted down, Lucy opened her notebook again. She picked up her pencil and began sketching a picture of Bart, the janitor, just like she had promised him earlier. Her small hands worked carefully, capturing the details she remembered from their late-night hallway conversation. Once her parents and grandmother had drifted off to sleep, her grandfather reappeared beside her. His presence was soft but strong, just as it had been every time before. And now, Lucy was starting to understand what he truly was. She realized her grandfather wasn't just a visitor from her memories. He was something more, an angel. And whenever he was near, she felt stronger, braver, healthier. He gently told Lucy that she didn't need the oxygen cannula while he was around. And Lucy believed him. Without hesitation, she reached up and removed the nasal tubing. Then, to her own quiet amazement, she stepped out of bed. No gasping, no dizziness, just a calm breath and steady feet. She followed her grandfather down the hallway once again. Not long after, she saw Bart, still cleaning the corridor floor. His movements were slow, worn down by grief, but his eyes lit up a little when he saw Lucy. She handed him the drawing she had made, holding it out with a small smile. Then she told him gently that Jesus loved him and that he would see his wife again someday. Bart's face softened, and for the first time in a long while, he smiled back. Lucy kept walking, her grandfather guiding her. Soon, they reached the hallway outside Edgar's room. The night guard was there too, but he was too distracted to notice anything. As usual, he was hunched over his phone, headphones in, completely absorbed in his video game. The sound was loud enough to cover everything else. Seeing her chance, Lucy quietly slipped past him and into Edgar's room. Inside, Edgar was still awake, lying in his usual position. When he saw Lucy again, he looked confused. She walked over to his bedside and asked for his name. They'd never formally met before, not properly, and Lucy wanted to change that. Edgar gave her his name, and Lucy smiled. She asked if she could stay a while. Edgar wasn't sure why a 5-year-old girl had come to see him in the middle of the night, but there was something disarming about her. So he nodded, and Lucy sat down at the edge of his bed. She told him quietly that she had a breathing problem. Edgar listened. Then, in a soft moment of shared vulnerability, they comforted each other, both of them unsure of what was coming next, but both holding on to the hope that, somehow, they'd get better. As Lucy sat beside Edgar's bed, their conversation continued. She asked him gently about his family, where they were, what they were like. Edgar paused. At first, he didn't want to talk about it. His past wasn't something he liked to revisit. But after a moment of silence, he decided to open up just a little. He told Lucy that he used to have a family, a wife, a daughter, people who once cared about him. But after the things he had done, the harm he had caused, they cut him off. They stopped speaking to him completely. Lucy listened quietly, then told Edgar, with the calmness of someone far older than her years, that he should go home and ask for forgiveness. Maybe they'd forgive him. Maybe it wasn't too late. Edgar shook his head. He said it was already over. Too much time had passed. The damage had been done. All he was doing now was waiting to die. Lucy didn't push him, but she wasn't done either. Guided by a quiet faith, she asked Edgar to take out the Bible, the same one she'd placed on his chest the first night. She asked him to read it, not for himself, but for her. Just try, she said, for my sake. Edgar agreed. They opened to one of her favorite parts, Matthew chapter 2. Together, they read the story of the birth of Jesus during the reign of King Herod. Afterward, Lucy said goodnight and headed back to her room. On the way, though, she stepped into another room nearby. Inside, she met an elderly woman named Betty Darcy, who looked to be around 70. Betty was lying in bed, reading the Bible, a nasal cannula resting beneath her nose. Lucy smiled and told her that Jesus loved her deeply. Then, pointing beside her, Lucy introduced Betty to her grandfather. To Lucy's surprise, and Betty's too, Betty could actually see him. Lucy returned to her room and went to sleep peacefully, her grandfather keeping watch nearby. And as the nights passed, something beautiful began to happen. Each evening, with her grandfather guiding her, Lucy quietly visited different patients around the hospital. She would talk to them, tell them that Jesus loved them, and sometimes leave behind small drawings of Jesus she had made, little reminders of hope. Her visits were quiet, simple, but deeply meaningful. She gave people something to hold on to. With Edgar, things grew deeper. Lucy taught him how to pray, little by little. They read the Bible together every night. Slowly, something began to change in him. The bitterness he once carried began to soften. His heart, once guarded, started to open. Then, one morning, something unexpected happened. As James wheeled Lucy through the hallway in her wheelchair, Pastor Johnson arrived at the hospital with two guests. Lucy noticed them right away and asked her dad to stop. She felt something important was about to happen. The two women with the pastor looked familiar, even though Lucy had never met them. And as they got closer, it became clear they were Edgar's wife and daughter. Pastor Johnson continued down the hallway and entered Edgar's room. Inside, he found Edgar sitting up, quietly reading the Bible. A moment later, the pastor smiled. Inside Edgar's room, Pastor Johnson stepped forward and gently told him that he had brought two guests with him. He motioned to the door, and when it opened, Edgar saw them, his wife, his daughter. For a moment, he just stared, stunned. Then, without saying a word, his eyes filled with tears. He broke down, overcome with emotion. It was a moment he never imagined would come. After everything he had done, after all the distance and silence, he never thought he'd be someone his family would want to see again. But there they were. And in that quiet moment, all he could feel was thankfulness for God, for grace, and for the second chance he never thought he'd get. While that reunion unfolded, James stood nearby, watching from the hallway with Lucy. He turned to her and asked, gently but curiously, what exactly was happening. How had this come to be? Lucy looked up at him and said, even though you're a grown-up, there are still some things you don't understand. Then she added softly that God had finally answered her prayers she'd been saying every night with Edgar. James was quiet for a second. Then he asked how she knew so much about Edgar in the first place. He still didn't understand how this connection had happened between his daughter and a dying man she'd never met before. Time passed, and soon it was Christmas. Lucy's family decided to spend it right there in the hospital with her. They brought what they could, small gifts, decorations, and warmth. And Lucy, true to who she was, had something special planned. She had written a letter to Edgar. It was simple, heartfelt, and honest. In it, Lucy told Edgar that for Christmas, she wanted to give him something he really needed, one of her kidneys. She wanted him to live. Dr. Stanwyck read the letter and responded gently. She explained that something like that couldn't be decided so quickly. It would need her parents' approval, proper medical screening, and several discussions before anything could happen. But Lucy was clear. She meant it. She truly wanted to help Edgar. She turned to her father and asked for his permission. "Please," she said, "let me help him." James didn't respond right away. The moment was heavy. Before he could say anything, Lucy's grandmother turned to Dr. Stanwyck with a question of her own. Was it even possible for a child's kidney to work in an adult? Dr. Stanwyck answered carefully, but honestly. "Yes," she said, "it's possible. Lucy has the right blood type. She's compatible with Edgar." James still wasn't sure how to respond to Lucy's request. The thought of his daughter donating a kidney, at her age, was hard to process. He told her he'd think about it. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. Just a promise to consider. That night, Lucy made a simple request. She asked James to take her to Edgar's room. And even though he still carried his doubts, he agreed. As they walked through the hallway together, Lucy greeted other patients along the way. Some waved, others smiled. She stopped to talk with a few of them, handing out soft words of encouragement like she always did. Until now, James hadn't seen this side of her. He didn't realize how many people she had touched in that hospital. But now, walking beside her, it became clear almost every patient they passed knew her. She had made friends with nearly everyone. By the time they reached Edgar's room, something had changed in the air. Edgar looked different. There was a lightness in him. The sadness that had once filled his face was gone. The visit from his wife and daughter had restored something in him. That, and the hope Lucy had quietly nurtured through her nighttime visits. But the moment didn't last long. Lucy began to struggle again. Her breathing tightened. She clutched her chest and looked at her father. "Take me back to my room," she whispered. James didn't hesitate. But before she left, Lucy handed something to Edgar. The notebook she had carried with her every night. The one filled with her sketches and messages. Then, without drawing attention, she placed something else in his hand. The handcuff keys. The same keys the distracted guard had left behind the night of the fire alarm. Back in his room, Edgar opened the book and began to read. Inside were drawings and small handwritten notes. They told a story, a dream Lucy had about a sad man who needed help. A man who didn't know how to believe again. Page by page, Edgar realized that story was about him. At the very end of the notebook, Lucy had left him one final message. She wanted to give him her kidney. She wanted him to live, to go back to his family. That was her gift. Edgar's hands trembled as he read. He couldn't hold back the tears. He broke down in bed, sobbing into the pages, overcome with emotion. Using the key Lucy had given him, Edgar unlocked his cuffs and left his room. He made his way down the hallway, searching for her. When he arrived at Lucy's room, the scene before him stopped him cold. Dr. Stanwyck and her team were surrounding the bed. Lucy's oxygen levels had dropped sharply, and they were trying everything to stabilize her. Edgar stood in the doorway, helpless, watching it unfold. Then, at 6:47 a.m., on the morning of December 25th, the doctor looked up and quietly pronounced her death. James, Isabel, and Lucy's grandmother collapsed into tears. The room, once filled with warmth and hope, now fell into silence. Nothing could be said. Nothing could be done. Dr. Stanwyck had done all she could. But Lucy, the only child James and Isabel had, was gone. At that quiet moment, as James stood in the hallway, heartbroken and lost, something happened. He looked up, and there they were. The spirit of his father and Lucy appeared at the end of the corridor. They didn't say anything. They just smiled gently and waved goodbye. Not everything in life turns out the way we hope. Sometimes, our prayers don't get answered in the form we imagined. But when we stay connected, when we trust, what we need often finds its way to us. In Lucy's case, her heart may have stopped beating, but the rest of her remained strong. Her organs were healthy, and just as she had wished, one of her kidneys was donated to Edgar. While tears were shed on earth, something else was happening in heaven, celebration. Joy. A soul returned home. And down here, healing had begun. Because in his own brokenness, Edgar had received the second chance he thought would never come. He recovered. He held on to the faith that Lucy helped him find. And in time, Edgar was released from prison. He was reunited with his family. the ones he once believed he had lost forever. He started over, and he never forgot. Each Christmas, Edgar's family honors Lucy's memory. They gather, open her notebook, and read her favorite passage, the story of the three wise men and the Prince of Peace. It became a tradition, a way to remember the little girl who changed their lives. And what about Lucy's family? God didn't forget about them either. In time, they were blessed with a baby boy, James Jr., a new light in their lives. And though no one could ever replace Lucy, they carried her memory with them always. Her drawings, her words, her faith. She remained a part of every holiday, every story, every quiet prayer whispered late at night. Lucy may not have seen another Christmas herself, but the legacy she left behind echoed far beyond the walls of the hospital. Her kindness, her courage, her belief in something greater. Those things lived on in everyone she touched. Because of her, Edgar got his life back. He found forgiveness, peace, and love. And through her, he learned that no one, no matter their past, is ever truly beyond saving. As Edgar moved forward, building a new life with his family, Lucy's spirit never faded. Her story was passed down, her message remembered. And in that story, one truth stood tall. Even the smallest among us can leave the deepest impact. So what do you think? Was it fate that led Lucy to Edgar? Or was she truly sent on a mission from above?